Ethan Carter leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, staring at the city skyline through his office window. The towering headquarters of Evermart, his empire, reflected back at him, gleaming with success. A success that, lately, fell hollow. Reports flooded in, disgruntled employees, customer complaints, whispers of store mismanagement. He had built Evermart from the ground up, believing in its mission to provide affordable goods while treating employees like family. But now, the numbers told a different story. And worse, the people beneath those numbers were suffering. His executives assured him it was nothing more than overblown negativity. Employees always complained. No system was perfect. But Ethan had built his fortune by questioning what others ignored. And now, he was ready to see the truth for himself. The plan formed in his mind with swift precision. He wouldn't rely on reports, second-hand accounts, or sanitized corporate visits. He would walk into one of his own stores as an unknown. No fanfare, no privilege, just a man with a name tag and a paycheck like everyone else. 2 days later, Ethan stared at his reflection in a bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. His usual tailored suits were replaced by faded jeans and a navy blue polo shirt, slightly wrinkled to blend in. His thick, graying hair, usually slicked back with precision, was left slightly unkempt. A pair of wire-framed glasses perched on his nose, unnecessary, but effective in shifting his features just enough. He added a slight limp for good measure, a subtle detail that made him appear less commanding, more worn down by life. Mike Dawson. That was his name now. A 52-year-old former warehouse worker looking for a steady paycheck. His cover story was airtight, crafted with the same meticulousness that built his business. If anyone checked, they'd find a simple, unremarkable past. His assistant, Sarah, was the only one who knew. She hadn't been thrilled. "Ethan, this is insane. You don't need to play detective. You own the place." "That's exactly why I need to," he had replied. She had relented, albeit begrudgingly, ensuring his employment paperwork processed through standard hiring channels without raising any red flags. No one in store number 1478, a mid-sized location in a working-class district, would suspect their newest cashier was the CEO. The moment Ethan, or rather Mike, stepped into the store, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The fluorescent lighting cast a sterile glow over worn tile floors. The air smelled of cardboard, cleaning supplies, and faintly of burnt coffee from the employee break room. Shoppers navigated the aisles, their carts rattling over cracked linoleum. At the front, registers beeped in steady rhythm as cashiers scanned items, exchanging tired pleasantries. The employees behind them moved with quiet efficiency, their faces a mix of exhaustion and routine. "New guy," a gruff voice asked. Ethan turned to see a man in his mid-40s with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Brad, the store manager, his boss for the next few weeks. The man barely looked up from his notes, already unimpressed. "Yeah, Mike Dawson," Ethan said, keeping his voice neutral, even adding a slight hesitancy. Brad exhaled sharply, clearly unimpressed. "All right, Mike. Let's not waste time. You're on register duty. Don't screw it up." He gestured toward a row of checkout lanes. "Lisa, show him the ropes." Lisa. The name barely registered before Ethan turned and saw her, a woman in her early 30s, her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. She wore the same standard uniform as everyone else, but there was something different about her. A warmth in the way she smiled despite her clear fatigue. "First day?" she asked, offering a small, tired smile. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Don't worry. It's not too bad once you get the rhythm down." She gestured for him to follow her to a register. "Scan, bag, take payment." Simple, but people can get impatient, so stay calm. She moved through the process smoothly, scanning items with practiced ease, her hands quick but gentle. Ethan watched, noting how she interacted with customers, not just with efficiency, but with genuine care. A mother with 2 small children approached, struggling to balance a basket and a restless toddler. Lisa immediately stepped in to help unload the items onto the conveyor belt, chatting softly to distract the child. It was subtle, effortless. Ethan mirrored her movements as best as he could when his turn came. His hands, used to signing deals and shaking hands in boardrooms, fumbled slightly with the unfamiliar rhythm of scanning and bagging. A teenage boy impatiently shifted on his feet when Ethan took too long scanning a barcode. "Gotta be faster, man," the boy muttered. Lisa stepped in with a practiced ease. "It happens. Barcodes can be tricky." She met Ethan's gaze with reassurance before swiftly finishing the transaction. Brad wasn't as forgiving. He reappeared at the end of a lane, arms crossed. "Dawson, we're not here to make friends. Move faster or move out." The words were sharp, dismissive. Ethan suppressed a retort, forcing himself to nod meekly. By the time his shift ended, his shoulders ached from hours of standing, his head throbbed from the constant beep of registers, and his patience had worn thin from customers who barely glanced at him. He had spent decades leading, commanding boardrooms, but today he had been just another cog in the machine. As he clocked out, he caught sight of Lisa again. She sat at a corner table in the break room, sipping from a dented thermos. A weary exhale left her lips before she glanced at her phone, eyes scanning a message before she pocketed it with a forced neutrality. Ethan wasn't sure why he lingered, but something about Lisa intrigued him. She wasn't just another employee grinding through the motions. There was a quiet resilience in her, a kindness that went beyond what the job demanded. As he left the store, walking through the automatic doors into the cool night air, one thought settled in his mind. Something was very wrong in store number 1478, and he was going to find out exactly what. Ethan quickly fell into the rhythm of his new role, though the work was more grueling than he had anticipated. Each shift stretched endlessly, an exhausting cycle of scanning, bagging, and forced pleasantries with customers who barely acknowledged his presence. His feet ached from standing for hours, his back stiff from repetitive motions. It was a humbling reminder. This was the daily reality for the people who kept his stores running. Brad remained an ever-present storm cloud, his sharp eyes scanning for the slightest mistake. He barked orders, cut breaks short, and reminded everyone that their jobs were a privilege, not a right. Employees avoided him when they could, lowering their gazes when he passed, hoping to escape his scrutiny. The atmosphere was one of silent endurance, where compliance meant survival. Lisa, however, was different. While others wore their exhaustion like a second skin, she moved through the day with quiet determination. She worked faster than anyone, her hands a blur at the register, yet she never rushed customers, never let her fatigue slip into her voice. More than once, Ethan caught her discreetly covering for coworkers, offering to finish a transaction so someone could steal a sip of water, smoothing over a customer's frustration with a gentle reassurance. She had a way of making people feel seen. One evening, as the rush slowed, Ethan noticed Lisa pulling a crumpled envelope from her pocket and staring at it for a long moment before exhaling sharply and tucking it away. It wasn't until later, in the break room, that he found her sitting alone at a plastic table, the same envelope unfolded in her hands. She chewed her lip, eyes scanning the paper with a furrowed brow. He hesitated before stepping closer. "Everything okay?" Lisa looked up, startled. For a moment, she seemed about to deny it, but then her shoulders dropped slightly. "Just bills," she admitted, folding the paper and slipping it back into her pocket. Same as always. Ethan didn't press, but something about the way she said it, so resigned, so practiced, stuck with him. Over the next few days, he paid more attention. He noticed the way Lisa packed up leftovers from a break room at the end of her shift, slipping them into her bag when she thought no one was looking. He saw how she scheduled herself for extra shifts, how she lingered near the schedule board, hoping for more hours. He overheard a hushed phone call where she promised someone, her son, he realized, that she'd be home soon, that they'd figure it out. The reality settled in uncomfortably. Lisa wasn't just hardworking, she was struggling. And yet, she still found time to help others. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening. The store was winding down, the last customers filtering through, when a young mother approached Lisa's register, her toddler fussing in her arms. The woman looked frantic, her eyes darting between the screen and the small wad of bills in her hand. Wait, I think I miscalculated, she muttered, rifling through her pockets. The items on the conveyor belt were basic: diapers, baby formula, a few cans of food. Essentials. Lisa, without hesitation, reached into her own pocket and pulled out a few bills. She slid them across the counter, lowering her voice. "It's okay. Just take it." The woman's eyes welled with tears. She hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you." She clutched the bag to her chest and hurried out before anyone could question it. Ethan barely had time to process what he'd witnessed before Brad's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "What the hell was that?" Lisa stiffened. She turned, already knowing she was caught. Brad stormed over, his expression a mask of outrage. "You think you can just hand out money on company time?" he spat. "That's theft, Lisa. You're stealing from a store." "It wasn't theft," she said evenly. "She was short, and it was my own money." Brad scoffed. "I don't care whose money it was. That's not how we do things here. You're playing charity at the register? You want to get fired." The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Ethan clenched his fists, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had spent his career making tough business decisions, cutting losses, enforcing policies. But this was something else entirely. Lisa held Brad's glare, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. But there was fear, too, barely hidden beneath the surface. She needed this job. Ethan forced himself to stay silent, though every instinct screamed to intervene. He wasn't Mike Dawson, the cashier. He was still Ethan Carter, CEO of Evermart. And if he revealed himself now, the truth would never come out. He had to see how far this went. Brad's eyes narrowed. "Final warning, Lisa. Next time you're gone." Lisa nodded once, biting back whatever she wanted to say. Brad stormed off, leaving the register area in suffocating silence. Lisa turned back to her screen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter like she needed something to hold on to. Ethan saw the subtle tremble in her fingers before she forced herself to continue scanning the next customer's groceries. Something inside him hardened. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was something deeper, systemic. Employees living paycheck to paycheck, afraid to speak up. A company culture that had lost its way. And somewhere along the line, he had let it happen. As he walked to the break room to clock out, a single thought settled in his mind with absolute clarity. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ethan had spent years making calculated decisions, mastering the art of control. But as the days passed, watching Lisa struggle under the weight of Brad's tyranny, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: pure, unfiltered anger. Not the corporate frustration of missed projections or bad press, but something deeper, something personal. He kept his head down, playing his role, but his mind was working nonstop. He spoke to more employees, listening carefully. The stories were all the same: overworked, underpaid, treated like disposable parts of a machine. Schedules were deliberately manipulated to avoid overtime pay, and anyone who dared to speak up was swiftly given fewer hours until they had no choice but to quit. Complaints to HR went unanswered, their reports conveniently lost in bureaucratic limbo. And Brad was at the center of it all. He ruled with a mix of fear and favoritism, ensuring that only those who stayed silent survived. Lisa had lasted this long because she was too valuable to let go, but the moment she became an inconvenience, her time would be up. Ethan refused to let that happen. The store had been buzzing all day with whispers of a corporate evaluator arriving for an unannounced inspection. It was standard practice, an undercover auditor sent to assess operations, customer service, and overall efficiency. Brad was a different man under scrutiny. He barked orders with even more venom, forcing employees to skip breaks, double-check displays, and upsell at every opportunity. Lisa barely had a moment to breathe. She worked 2 registers at once, fielding impatient customers while Brad loomed nearby, watching her like a hawk. The moment came when an elderly woman struggled with the card reader, her hands shaking as she attempted to enter a PIN. The line behind her grew restless. A few huffs of impatience, the tapping of fingers against carts. Lisa, patient as always, leaned forward. "Take your time, ma'am. No rush." Brad pounced. "Hurry it up. he snapped, loud enough for the entire front end to hear. "We're not running a charity, Lisa. Move the line." Lisa's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw the subtle shift in her shoulders, the tension in her jaw. She finished the transaction, helping the woman bag her groceries with the same quiet kindness. But the moment the receipt printed, Brad was in her face. "You just cost us a sale," he hissed. "People left because of that delay." Lisa's grip on the register tightened. "I was helping a customer." "You were slowing down my store." Lisa exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "It's not your store." For a moment, the entire front end went still. Brad's face darkened. "What did you just say?" Lisa lifted her chin. "This isn't your store. It's ours. The people who work here, who keep it running. You act like we're beneath you, like we should be grateful for this job, but we deserve better than this." A beat of silence. Then Brad laughed. A short, cruel sound. "You think you're some kind of hero?" He shook his head, his voice dropping to something colder. "You're replaceable, Lisa. You all are. And if you don't like it, you can leave." Ethan saw the exact moment Lisa realized it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She was done. Her eyes flickered with something like defeat, and before she could say anything else, Ethan stepped forward. "That's enough." Brad turned, annoyed. "Stay out of this, Dawson." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. No. There was something about the way he said it, the unwavering steel behind the word, that made Brad hesitate. Employees nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. They were watching now, waiting. Brad scoffed, but his voice wasn't as sharp. "You're in over your head, old man. You don't get how this works." Ethan tilted his head. "I think I do." And then, with deliberate calm, he reached up and removed his glasses. The room shifted. A strange, collective inhale. Brad's frown deepened. "What the hell are you?" Ethan straightened, his posture shifting, shedding the weight of Mike Dawson. His voice, when he spoke again, was no longer quiet or hesitant. It was the voice of a man who had built an empire. "My name is Ethan Carter." Silence crashed over the store. Lisa's eyes widened. Someone near the registers gasped. Brad took a half step back, confusion flickering into something closer to fear. Ethan let the moment settle, let the weight of his name sink in. Then, without looking away from Brad, he asked, "Do you know what happens when a store manager falsifies payroll records?" Brad swallowed. "Or when they intimidate employees into working through breaks. When they threaten and coerce and create a hostile work environment." The color drained from Brad's face. Ethan cut him off. "You're done here. As of this moment, you're fired." Brad's mouth open, closed. His bravado cracked. "You can't." "I can," Ethan said smoothly. "And I just did." He turned toward one of the assistant managers who had been watching, frozen. "Escort him out." No one moved at first. Then, slowly, one of the employees, someone who had spent the last year flinching under Brad's rule, stepped forward. Brad started to protest, but the words died before they could form. He looked around, but no one stood with him. No one would. Lisa was still staring at Ethan, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. Ethan gave her a small nod before turning to the rest of the store. "If any of you have concerns about wages, hours, treatment, my office will be reviewing every complaint personally." His voice softened just a fraction. "This isn't how Evermart was meant to be run, and I won't let it continue." There was no applause, no dramatic celebration. But there was something in the air, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. And Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The morning after Brad's termination, the store felt different. There was no grand announcement, no parade, but a quiet shift in energy, like a heavy weight had been lifted. Employees still moved with purpose, stocking shelves and ringing up customers. But their movements weren't as tense, their glances toward the manager's office not as fearful. The store wasn't fixed overnight, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like something had changed. Ethan stood near the break room, watching. He had spent the last few days unraveling the damage Brad had caused, reviewing timesheets, speaking privately with employees, ensuring that all the complaints swept under the rug were brought into the light. It wasn't easy. Some of the staff had been skeptical, hesitant to trust that things would truly improve. And he didn't blame them. Promises meant nothing without action. Lisa had been the hardest to read. She had kept her head down, doing her job as usual. But there was a distance in her now. She hadn't confronted him, hadn't pulled him aside to demand explanations. She simply went on as if nothing had changed. He found her in the break room after her shift, stirring sugar into a cup of coffee with slow, deliberate movements. "You haven't said anything," Ethan said finally, leaning against the counter. Lisa didn't look up. "What do you want me to say?" Ethan considered that. "Whatever you're thinking." She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "What I'm thinking is that for weeks, I thought you were just another guy trying to get by. And then suddenly, you're Ethan Carter." She shook her head. "I don't know how I'm supposed to process that." "I didn't lie," Ethan said carefully. "But I didn't tell the truth either." Lisa finally met his gaze. "You watched what was happening. You saw what Brad was doing, saw how he treated people. And you let it happen. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. And it stung more than Ethan wanted to admit." "You're right," he said, not trying to defend himself. "I needed to see it firsthand. I needed to understand." Lisa studied him for a long moment before exhaling. "And now that you do? Now I fix it." She huffed, shaking her head. "You say that like it's easy." "It's not." He hesitated, then added, "But I let this company get away from me. I trusted the wrong people to uphold the values I built it on. That's my failure, and I intend to make it right." Lisa's gaze softened, but only slightly. "People have heard promises before." Ethan nodded. "Then I'll just have to prove it." And so he did. In the weeks that followed, Evermart underwent a transformation. Employee complaints were no longer ignored. Schedules were restructured to ensure fair hours. Break times were enforced, and payroll was audited to return stolen wages. More than that, Ethan began personally visiting stores, not as a CEO conducting a formal inspection, but as a leader listening to his people. Word spread. For the first time in years, employees felt heard. Customers noticed the difference, too. Cashiers who weren't afraid to smile, managers who didn't hover with threats, a store that felt less like a machine, and more like a place where people mattered. Lisa remained cautious, watching from the sidelines. She worked the same shifts, took on the same responsibilities, but there was a quiet reserve in her interactions with Ethan. He didn't push her. Trust, he knew, wasn't something that could be ordered into existence. It had to be earned. The moment came late one evening, when Lisa was closing up. Ethan was there, double-checking reports, ensuring new policies were being enforced. He watched as Lisa lingered near the register, her fingers brushing against her name tag. She turned to him. "You really meant it, didn't you?" He met her gaze. Every word. A slow nod. Then, finally, a small, genuine smile. For the first time since this all began, Ethan felt like he had truly done something right. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.